Yeah.
6 o'clock, I'll call this meeting of the Washington County Board of Supervisors to order. We'll rise for a moment of silent prayer and the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call. We're all here except for Supervisor Milliken, who is excused. Supervisor Mary is on Zoom. For the consent agenda, I'll look for a motion to approve. Supervisor Schultheis, Supervisor Hartwig. Any questions or comments? There being none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Personal appearance, we have Judge Giernot present on the drug court. There you go.
I'll try that again. Good evening. It's nice to see you all. I appreciate the invitation. I am Judge Sandra Giernot. I currently serve in branch 4 of your circuit court, and I also preside in the Washington County Adult Drug Treatment Court. I'm here today to present, to both give you an update, and for those of you who are not familiar with our drug court, to also give you some information about how our drug court operates and the success that we have had thus far. I want to start first by explaining to you what our drug treatment court is. Drug courts are partnerships between the criminal justice system and the treatment community. We combine evidence-based treatment with strict behavioral accountability. That collaboration results in a drug court team that structures treatment, supervision, and intervention in order to address substance use and criminal activity that is associated with that substance use. The partners for the Washington County Adult Drug Treatment Court are the Washington County Human Services Department, your Washington County District Attorney's Office, and your Washington County Sheriff, the Wisconsin State Public Defender Office here in West Bend, the West Bend office of the Wisconsin Department of Corrections, and Elevate, who is our local nonprofit partner that provides case management and drug treatment court coordinator services for our court. Our goals of drug treatment court are to accomplish 3 main objectives: to reduce recidivism, to decrease the likelihood that an offender will commit crimes in the future, to reduce substance use amongst the participants that come through our court, and to address their rehabilitative needs. I've shared with you the mission of the Drug Treatment Court and highlighted for you what I think are key words to keep in mind about the focus of the drug court. Of course, focusing on accountability of our participants as it ties to reducing recidivism, and that ties then to increasing public safety here in Washington County. Our drug treatment court program is a post-conviction court. What that means is an individual is first convicted of some sort of offense, some sort of crime, and their participation in the court comes by way of one of two mechanisms, either as a sentence from a judge who is sentencing them for the crime they have been convicted of, or by way of an alternative to revocation, which is an action taken by the Department of Corrections, where the Department of Corrections offers them drug treatment court as an alternative to returning them to a prison institution for incarceration. Referrals to our courts can come really from any source. The person, him or herself, that person's attorney, the district attorney's office, the Department of Corrections, judges in our county can make referrals, and any other source can as well. This, of course, does include members of the community, family members of the potential participants, as well, our potential referrals. For our current and historical drug court population, most referrals come by way of the Washington County District Attorney's Office, and the balance of the referrals usually come from the Department of Corrections, who refers them as the ATRs, the alternatives to revocation. Everyone who is referred to drug court must meet a set of objective criteria in order to be deemed eligible for drug court. And that criteria requires them to be a Washington County resident. The offense for which they are convicted must be an eligible offense. So some offenses are ineligible because of the nature of the offense. They must not be a violent offender pursuant to the definition under state or federal statutes. And then they are assessed utilizing specific assessment tools, and they must qualify as a high risk, high need individual. That relates to both their criminogenic needs as well as their substance use needs. If they meet that objective criteria, they are deemed eligible for our court, but the decision to be admitted to the court is still within the judge who sentences or the Department of Corrections who would offer the ATR. I also want to emphasize that drug court is a choice. And while a participant who is referred to drug court is probably in a less advantageous position by way of their legal predicament, it is a voluntary program. The person cannot be forced to complete drug treatment court. They ultimately sign an agreement to complete it, either by way of the Department of Corrections ATR or by indicating at sentencing to a judge that they are asking to be sentenced to drug treatment court. I want to explain to you a bit about how our court operates. We've talked about, or I've emphasized to you the aspects of accountability for our court, and we hold our participants accountable for their drug court obligations that correlate to the phase they're in our program. We have a 5-phase drug court program, and their obligations depend upon which phase they are in. Participants are all supervised by a probation agent and a case manager, both of whom monitor their progress, administer drug screens, and collect information from third parties about that participant's compliance with our drug court requirements and their progress in the recovery. Participants are required to appear for status hearings. When we talk about drug court meeting on a weekly basis and the actual court itself operating, what we're referring to are these status hearings where the participants appear before myself as well as the rest of the team members, and they discuss with me a number of things, but mostly their compliance or non-compliance with regards to their drug court obligations. We emphasize acknowledging the participants' successes with regards to their recovery. And often we focus on finding ways to support participants who are struggling with recovery. And so those status hearings are important ways for the court to both focus on accountability, but also focus on hopefully supporting the individual who is likely struggling, at least early on, with their recovery. In order to prepare for these weekly status hearings that are held in court on the record, open to the public, like every other court hearing is, or most other court hearings are in Washington County, the drug court team holds what is referred to as a staffing. Now, a staffing is a confidential pre-court hearing that is held by the drug court team. This is where the team members discuss the participants' weekly progress. We receive information prepared by the case manager, who compiles all of the information combined with the probation agent from all of those sources: employers, family members, the results of drug screens, any other collateral sources like law enforcement contact, etc. And we receive a staffing report. And ultimately, we discuss the participants' progress for that last week and determine what, if any, interventions need to occur with regards to that particular participant. Each team member comes from a different discipline. When you heard me talk about the partners on or for your drug court, we all come from different disciplines. And so this multidisciplinary team reflects different perspectives, different training, different education. And so each team member has an opportunity to advocate for their assessment of the participants' needs and what type of intervention or accountability or recognition is appropriate for that particular participant that week in drug court. The ultimate goal of this discussion is for the judge to walk out of staffing with a consensus that can then be executed in court. While the judge ultimately makes the decisions about what, if any, intervention occurs and implements them in the courtroom, the team very much functions as a team in staffing, and the product that is an outcome, or I guess the outcome really, is a product of the teamwork that occurs in staff. I like to refer to drug court as changing behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs. It's a short way to refer to what is an incredibly challenging effort and very hard work that goes on by the participants that are ultimately successful in drug court. And one of the mechanisms that we do, or that we use in order to accomplish that, is what we refer to as incentives and sanctions. In addition to this accountability and the monitoring that we have with regards to the participants' obligations in drug court, we utilize incentives and sanctions. Rewards are used to increase desirable behavior. Sanctions are used to decrease undesirable behavior. It's a pretty simple concept. In drug court, the timing of using incentives and sanctions is particularly important. We strive to take action as close in time to either the desirable or the undesirable behavior as we can. Best practice tells us that the quicker we can become involved to recognize positive behavior, or the quicker we can become involved to address undesirable behavior, the better outcomes we are likely to create. It's a common misconception of drug courts that rewards and sanctions need to be high magnitude in order to be effective. That is not the case. And our goal in drug court, and what we know to be most effective based upon our training and education, is that a solid range of what we call intermediate magnitude incentives and sanctions is really what is most effective for our population. In that regard, our court operates with common positive incentives, such as verbal praise, the judge acknowledging and giving credit for positive work that has occurred by the participants, a round of applause from the judge and from the team, asking the participant to stand in court and receive a round of applause. We have a monthly fishbowl drawing where each week that a participant successfully completes all of their drug court required obligations, their name is put in a fishbowl, and they could be eligible to receive a small monetary gift card that is donated for that purpose. And we also acknowledge participants' progress and strides in 4 different categories of drug court awards. Those categories include the Helping Hand Award, the Health and Wellness Award, and those awards are given out by the team members who nominate participants to acknowledge what are unique or unusual progress that each participant might have made on any given week. And common sanctions in our court include verbal warnings from the judge, written assignments like essays, requiring the participants to check in more frequently with their case manager other than or on top of what would be their other mandatory check-ins pursuant to their particular phase, requiring them to come back every week and see me in court when they would have otherwise had a week off pursuant to their phase, requiring them to attend increased case management appointments. So when we talk about that range of intermediate magnitude incentives and sanctions, these are some garden variety examples of those ranges, or of those of that range. I'm often asked, well, Judge, where does jail fall on this? How do you use jail? Because I think there's a common perception that jail needs to be a tool that's used in drug court. It certainly is a tool that is used in drug court. But I think an easy way to explain it is that for drug court, incarceration is the biggest sanction that we have. So if I begin an experience or person's experience in drug court by applying the most severe sanction that I have for their first infraction, there is nowhere to go. So I have no increasing sanctions for them. Additionally, generally speaking, when a person starts drug court, the sanction they are most familiar with is incarceration. They are not familiar with being asked to write an essay and explain their thought process about why they didn't show up for the drug screen. They are not asked to think through what skills they need to use in terms of abstaining for use for the next few days. So they're often, we often try to focus on getting them to use the skills that will lead them to sober behavior and sober actions. And while we use jail, we use it for very targeted and specific purposes, and in circumstances where we need a high magnitude response for what would be very, very concerning behavior. So I want to give you some ideas about what our phase structure looks like. I explained that we have a 5-phase drug court. If you complete the court with no delays, meaning pretty much perfection, which is very challenging to do and is not expected because we expect individuals to struggle in drug court, you will complete it in 14 months. And what I've done here is summarize each phase. And I caution myself to say summarize because you're about to see some slides with a lot of data and text in them. I assure you they are summaries. Each of these phases are comprehensive. They have significant requirements for the participant, but these would be summaries of what is required. Phase 1 involves acute stabilization for the participant. Our population generally comes in heavily in active use. They usually have negative environments, whether that be their residents or their social groups. They often do not have stable employment. They often do not have any source of income. They often do not have reliable transportation. And so in addition to focusing on treatment, getting them connected with the appropriate level of care for their treatment, there's also a whole host of stabilization that needs to occur as well. So you'll also see the participant requirements listed. It involves curfew, obviously a focus on treatment. In order to accomplish phase 1 and advance to phase 2, the participant must spend at least 60 days in phase 1, during which the participant must satisfy all the requirements of phase 1, which include at least 14 days of consecutive sobriety immediately preceding advancement to phase 2. When we get to phase 2, it's referred to as clinical stabilization, and you'll see an ongoing continuation of the focus that you saw in phase 1, focus on treatment and continued stabilization. Participants in phase 2 are often transitioning from their first level of care of treatment into a lower level of care. Sometimes they transition from residential to something community-based for treatment. If they were otherwise in a community-based treatment, they may drop down to a lesser frequency. Instead of 4 times a week, they may drop to 3 times a week. Sometimes participants in phase 2 begin to look for employment to improve their income and their otherwise economic stability. Phase 2 is 90 days in length, and every phase thereafter is also 90 days in length. Participants there must complete 30 days of sobriety, immediately advancing to phase 3. Phase 3 is referred to as pro-social habilitation. And so you'll see the focus there shift really to a lot of life skills combined with more advancement in sobriety and how to essentially live now sober in the environments and hopefully the new lifestyle that that individual is building for him or herself. The phase here again is 90 days. Participants here must complete 45 days of sobriety immediately preceding advancement. And I mentioned the days of sobriety that are required. Our participants often achieve or more than that. But that is the minimum that is required in order to advance between the two or between the phases. Phase 4 is referred to as adaptive habilitation. You'll see some of those core components continue. Appearing in court, appearing through your case manager, being supervised by your probation agent, always at least 2 times per week submitting to drug screens. They can always be required to submit to more drug screens if we have concern about their whether they're engaging in use. They have varying degrees of curfew depending upon what phase you're in. So you'll see, as I've shown you these slides, you see those particular requirements change as the person, in theory, advances in drug court. Again, 90 days in phase 4 and 60 days of consecutive sobriety. And then finally, for phase 5, this is really where our participants are spending their last 90 days with us in drug court and really planning for their future that no longer involves a case manager or a judge or a treatment court team supporting them in their sobriety, and beginning to focus on their independence and the support network that they have built for themselves in the community to maintain their long-term sobriety. A participant must complete obviously phase 5, and then they would be eligible for graduation, which is a hearing that we hold in order to acknowledge their success in drug treatment court. So that is a quick synopsis of the 5 phases of our drug court program. Again, minimum of 14 months in the program. I wanted to share some statistics with you and some funding information about drug court. Thus far, we have 18 completed participants, 11 of which are graduates, 7 of which were discharged from drug court, 12 current active participants in our court. Our participants average about 485 days in drug court. And so you'll see it is not 14 months. That isn't, while that's the minimum, we have no expectation that anyone will actually complete it in that. And then I asked for some statistics about the treatments our participants receive. Of the 30 total participants that at least engaged in our drug court, over half of them, when they began drug court, were recommended to engage in residential level of care. And I point that out because residential is the highest level of care that is recommended for an individual struggling with a substance use disorder. And so when we talk about that high risk, high need population that we are targeting, for me, that particular statistic tells us that the population that we are hitting really is that population. In terms of our funding, our annual budget is just shy of $160,000. For those of you who have been on the county board for some time, you would be aware that the court is funded by a federal grant, and the county board approved the county match for that grant, which is about $33,000, which the county contributes in order to be able to receive that federal grant. Our highest budgetary expenses at this time, of course, are case management and drug testing. Drug testing is incredibly expensive, but a necessary and important component. And our current funding cycle will end in September of next year. So we will begin the process of applying for and attempting to secure ongoing grant funding, I'm guessing early next year. Elevate and Human Services Departments are the two partners that lead the charge, so to speak, with regards to funding the court. And then I wanted to end by sharing a story, not a story, an experience, because it's a real life experience for one of our participants who graduated from drug treatment court. So Dan Roos is a drug treatment court graduate. I had the pleasure of presiding over his graduation. He came to drug court by way of an alternative to revocation from the Department of Corrections. So he was an individual who was sentenced and had been released on extended supervision. This was previously known as parole, if you were familiar with that from decades ago. And the Department of Corrections was considering revoking his community supervision, returning him to the prison for incarceration, and instead offered him the alternative to revocation of drug court. I've summarized Dan's criminal record for you. This is public record, so I'm not telling you something you can't find on your own. But you'll note that he had several convictions for drug possession. And of course, other crimes that I would tell you are typically associated, theft-related crimes, typically associated with persons who struggle with substance use. He had been sentenced to probation on 5 prior occasions, all of which had been revoked. He had never once successfully completed community-based supervision. When I asked him how many times he thought he had served time in jail on individual occasions, he got back to me a bit later and told me he thought it was 15 different occasions that he'd been in our Washington County jail. And prior to being admitted, his most recent period of incarceration in the prison system had been about 27 months. He was facing being returned to prison for a similar period of time. He was 33 when he started drug court and had shared as part of his assessment for drug court that he had been utilizing heroin, which was his drug of choice, since he was a senior in high school. So he had been struggling with substance use with heroin for his entire adult life. Dan is a proud graduate of our court. He graduated in September of 21. Spent 506 days in our program, so about 17 months. I've listed all of the accomplishments well, not all. I mean, we take that back. I've listed some of the accomplishments that Dan achieved during drug court. There are many more. But I listed these in order to share with you really what can be viewed as a transformed life. None of these are things that Dan had in his life when he was in active use and facing being returned to prison. And so he graduated drug court with a life that he had built on days that he fought for with sobriety over and over and over again for 506 days. And these are some of the specific things that I can share with you that are a product of the hard work that he accomplished. He has been sober since April 26th of 2020 from heroin, his drug of choice. He married his significant other earlier this year. He regained custody of his son while he was in drug treatment court. We refer to that as being reunified with his child, who had been removed from his care as related to his substance use. And he continues to parent that child inside his home and has another child as well. He still has the same employer that he obtained during drug court and maintained during his time in drug court. I would tell you that I think that for a lot of us, it seems a little perhaps odd to share, or it feels a little uncomfortable to share what you have in your bank account. But for a person who has a substance use disorder, the idea of being able to save money and put it in a bank account is something that is so foreign to them because their money is constantly spent on something else. So for him, the ability to have earned that money and to save it and have it earmarked for something like a home, which is what he plans to use it for, is really a point of pride for him. He continues to use all of the pro-social skills and activities that he developed in drug court to continue on his path to recovery. includes all of the activities that he likes to engage in and his commitment to his healthy daily living skills. And Dan continues to be an active member in our drug treatment court alumni group, which is a group of our graduates that return on a monthly basis in order to provide support and camaraderie to our current participants as they are making their way through drug court. So I leave you with an idea of what is possible and what we have accomplished in drug court. So thank you so much for your time and attention. I certainly have time for questions if you have any.
Thank you. Our drug court is certainly impressive and we're proud of you and what you've done. I know that some of the supervisors have been there in person to witness on Thursday afternoons. I intend to do so at some point in the future myself. So we have any questions or comments? Supervisor Schultheis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation and the awareness. I'm curious about some of the specifics about if someone recidivates, where do they end up starting over? Are they taken back? Is there an extreme sanction? Things of that nature.
Sure. And you're asking about a participant who is currently in drug court? Correct. So it depends. If a person returns to use, sometimes it could be a slip where they have a period or an episode, a short episode of use. We would address it with a treatment response, potentially reassess them, figure out where they're at in terms of their recovery. And the response from the court would very likely be a treatment-based response. If a person returns to criminal behavior or engages in criminal behavior, the response depends a lot on what type of criminal behavior and then could face termination. So when I mentioned that we've had 7 participants who were discharged, 2 of them were discharged for criminal offenses. So in those circumstances, they committed another crime. The district attorney's office made a motion to terminate the participant from drug court. The drug court judge ultimately decides that motion. A due process hearing is held. The participant is afforded an attorney. And there are several steps that occur with regards to the due process. And ultimately, the judge decides whether to terminate. So the most severe accountability would be termination for the program. And if we're talking about returning to use, or whether it be a slip or a short episode, or even ongoing use, we would focus more on treatment to address that.
Thank you. And the total 16 have gone through drug treatment court. Is that a correct number at this point?
In terms of graduates,
Yes,
we have 11 graduates.
11.
Yes.
Okay. And and that was the number. And of those graduates, what are the statistics on their recidivation?
Sure. We've engaged UW-Milwaukee, Washington County, Professor Scholes to conduct recidivism studies for us. We do not yet have a sufficient population in order to have any statistically significant data. But by way of the district attorney's office and by way of the Department of Correction, both of whom have access to a wealth of data, they're able to let us know, and public access records, we're able to determine whether anyone has been arrested or picked up new charges. The majority of our participants stay in contact by way of our alumni program. Not all, but the majority. But we do not yet have a participant who has been arrested or has been charged with any other crimes that we are aware of, and we do check.
Thank you again.
Anyone else? Supervisor Newman.
Thank you. This sounds like a wonderful program. I'm curious if there's a limit to the amount of participants that can enter this.
At any given time, I think our maximum capacity is 20 participants, but that varies greatly depending upon where participants are at in the phase. The court is taxed most heavily when participants are in phases 1 through 3. And by the court, I mean our entire team. Because of the level of accountability, oversight, and services that are in place monitoring those participants in those phases. Phase 4 and phase 5 have participants who have achieved much more stability. And so the So we can generally hold more participants the more we have in phase 4 and phase 5. Right now, our population in our court is heavily in phases 1, 2, and 3. So we are very busy.
Thank you.
Supervisor Conrad.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, thank you, Judge Kiernath. It's amazing that our county offers these services, and I appreciate you for stepping up and taking this over from the previous judge who initiated this program. It's really a priceless service. And to a testimony to my own friend's son who has gone through the program and recently graduated. And it took him 2 rounds, but he did it and has a very bright future. He is one of the luckier ones too, I think, possibly that comes through the program that does have a strong support system. So like the importance of all the those interventions and additional things that you all supply, and really going through the variables of what they need to help be successful, because the social determinants is priceless and very important. But yeah, and I would also like to share too, one of the events that I witnessed when I went was an individual, going through the program. It's public records. She said that she had employment and then was a supervisor at a facility, and then ended up, I believe, hiring another individual who is going through the program in this facility where she was serving, was very supportive to these individuals. So shout out to the businesses out there too that see the value and are trying to help our citizens also be successful and support them and give them a second chance. But yeah, and I would just like to share too, or maybe for you to extrapolate for people, you use a certain type of questioning or kind of like interview style, and accustomed that as a nurse. It was very familiar to me. Would you maybe want to extrapolate on that and share that with county supervisors, please?
Sure. And Supervisor Conrad had the opportunity to observe drug court. So she has seen me utilize this particular strategy. It's referred to as motivational interviewing. And perhaps some of you are familiar with it from your either personal or professional lives. But drug courts operate under our drug court operates under what we refer to as evidence-based best practices. And the reason we use that is because drug courts are heavily studied. And when we utilize evidence-based best practices, we know that we are utilizing the best resources, skills, tools, and techniques to try to achieve the best outcomes. We're spending dollars and resources the most effective way we can, addressing this particular population in order to achieve our goals and our mission. And one of those skills and strategies is motivational interviewing. And so when I have status hearings with the participants, it does not look very much like court from a traditional perspective. And instead, I engage in motivational interviewing with the participants. I'm attempting to acknowledge and support them in their successes in their recovery, in circumstances where they are not making progress in the areas that we are attempting to encourage them to make progress in. I'm utilizing non-adversarial strategies and discussion points in an effort to try to get them to change their thought process and be open to changing their behavior, changing their attitudes, and changing their beliefs. It is very different than the adversarial system that you see go on in court, in traditional litigation and traditional court. And so I would tell you this is not something they teach you in law school. It is not something they teach you in judge school. They do teach you it in drug treatment court judge school. And so it very much requires, it requires you to really invest in the skill set and invest in the effort. It is a technique, however, that has been implemented by a lot of different entities. Department of Corrections, for example, utilizes it significantly with their population. It's utilized in a lot of the social services in an effort to help clients achieve the outcomes that they are looking to achieve. But it's meant to improve our outcomes, and so it is referred to as motivational interviewing. It's not for everyone. Certainly, it is something that takes time, takes practice, and you know, I've worked at it in order to try to do my best with the participants when I'm there. So,
Yeah, thank you. That's quite a skill set.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, thank you for the presentation.
appreciate it. I will end with an invitation. Drug court, Thursdays, 2:00. We're in the Washington County Circuit Court. It's a public court hearing. You are all welcome to attend. In the event in person is not convenient for you, Zoom is always an option. Certainly reach out to the court and I will make that available. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Our next item on the agenda is resolution 35. I'll look for a motion and second. Supervisor Hartwig, Supervisor Shadrin. I got you.
Whereas Diane Lyon has contributed 22 years of loyal service to the citizens of Washington County, and whereas Diane Lyon has chosen to retire from her present position of nurse manager at Samaritan Health Center, now therefore be it resolved that the Washington County Board of Supervisors pause in its deliberations to pay tribute and to commend Diane Lyon for her 22 years of meritorious service. Be it further resolved that on behalf of all citizens of Washington County, this body does herewith extend to her heartfelt thanks for her many accomplishments and successes. Be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to Diane Lyon as a token of appreciation on the part of this board.
Our next item was to be resolution 36, but seeing the referendum failed, we're not taking that up. Rest assured, we'll discuss this item at length during future meetings. So that brings up resolution 37, Parks and Golf Fiscally Thriving Plan.
Am I on? My name is Jamie Ludovic. I'm the county's Chief Community Development Officer. For those of you listening, tonight I have the distinct pleasure of talking to you a little bit about our collective 2050 Parks and Golf Fiscally Thriving Plan. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a history lesson about our parks financial sustainability plan. For those of you that were around at that point in time. So it wasn't very long ago when Josh was initially hired as the county administrator, and parks budget was being cut every single year. It was actually 2018 when I moved over to parks, and the county board at the time had a very long policy discussion about what we call our parks financial sustainability plan, which was an intentional decision to eliminate the tax levy that supports Washington County parks. So there was discussion at the time about what that meant in terms of shifting from using tax dollars to not using tax dollars. This is when we initiated an enterprise fund to account more like a business. And we had a long discussion about actually operating like a business, what that means, entering, some people have said competing the private sector was something I stood up at the county board at the time and said, we may be accused of competing if we take this direction. But 2018 was the first year we did it. We're like, we're going to do it. We can't keep cutting. We don't want to spend levy dollars. And we need to make that shift. So we enacted the parks entrance fees in 2018, and we put together a very thoughtful plan about how we were going to eliminate the tax dollars. We went from $1 million levy In 2021, if you watch the graph, you can see where we started to say the 2021 budget eliminated the use of tax dollars from the operation. Expenses bottomed out for parks in 2018 at 778,000 and have grown every year since. We're now at 2017 levels. So we were actually able to invest more in the properties through this plan. At the same time, the golf course paid off its debt and became a contributing factor. This is an important piece of the operation of parks revenues. So these are the revenues that support our operating budget. And I just wanted to point them out to you so that you can really see the magnitude that our venues, the hall, Glacier Hills Hall and Chapel, the barn at Sandy Knoll, and the barn at Homestead Hollow are contributing to this operation. If you add in the property rentals to the cabins and, you know, you're at over half, you can see that the daily and entrance park revenue is about a third. If you add that red sliver of enforcement, that's really what we were converting violators to passes. So we like to put that revenue in the category of entrances, entrance usage of the parks. And there is a subsidy coming from the golf course to the parks enterprise, which I think is an important point that we want to make sure we're recognizing exactly how the success of that operation is contributing overall to the enterprise. This very quick golf course revenues. I'm going to flip back because, so it was with the 2021 adoption of the budget, we, put out the press release that said we achieved fiscal sustainability. We're no longer operating with any tax dollars. And we started to say that over and over again. And at the same time, at that same moment, almost 2 years ago, we kind of looked at each other and we said, okay, we need a parks thriving plan. And which is what is before you tonight. And part of that discussion was we knew we were missing some of the long-term components of what it would really take to stay off the tax levy, to keep from coming back and saying, well, we're not asking for levy money to operate, but we really need a new roof, or we really need asphalt, or the septic system at the hall failed, or the air conditioning unit's gone bad, or, right? So we didn't address, you hear this about the city of Milwaukee all the time, about the capital needs, the infrastructure needs that park systems have. And so we set out to address that, and it took us 2 years. And it's what's before you tonight. And the reason it took so long is that it was a ridiculous amount of work. I just have to put in a plug to thank the Parks and Trails manager, Hogan Bliss, the staff at the golf course, the current ground superintendent out there, Dave Yankee, as well as the budget, politics, and analytics team on this, because the first step of this was really, truly inventorying and documenting everything that we have. Most of this plan is about what we have, and also noting that if this is our revenue coming in for the hall, chapel, and barn venues, there's an expectation that those are maintained, right? So we can't have a crumbling floor and expect that we're going to rent that place out for $5,000. It just isn't going to happen. And so we really, really took this seriously. We put together the cost estimates, the replacement schedules, calculating the future costs. And the amount of spreadsheets that I have, which I'm happy to share with everybody on what is all included in this is, we have every bridge on the Eisenbahn, to every pile of sand, to every fire pit, to every mattress, to every piece of furniture, to every appliance accounted for in replacement schedules and future costs. It's a lot of work. So for golf, the project totals are $7.4 million over the 30-year plan. It averages $250,000 a year. It includes equipment at the golf course. The plan for the golf course includes what the golf course needs. There is no cuts made to the golf course's 2050 plan. Parks, the initial projects began at $3.6 million, averaging about $500,000 a year. We were to adjust this for inflation over the 50 years. So it does not include equipment. That's a key note. A decision was made during the financial sustainability planning process that our trucks, which are mostly upfitted for our plow season, where we also plow county grounds, were being funded by sales tax. So that is not included, meaning basically the pickup trucks and lawnmowers is what we're when I say equipment. So the strategy for that remains the capital improvement program. I just want to make sure I was clear that the levy still pays for the ground operation. So the projects began at 13.6 million. The recommended plan in front of you recommends 10.8 million or $370,000 a year. So 2.7. Yeah, $2.7 million. Is that right? Was removed from the parks list. Again, this is existing infrastructure. And then just very quickly, I hope everybody had an opportunity to read the plan. I'm kind of pulling out what I think are just pieces I wanted to make sure people saw, heard, thought through. This is the document really serves as a playbook for everything that we've been doing. And it is chock full with policy recommendations that we'll continue to bring you and we'll continue to make. So I kind of thought the big ones were that the plan assumes a $220,000 annual margin for the golf course, meaning a margin above and beyond their budget. So baked into the golf course's operating budget is a substantial subsidy to not only the parks enterprise of $120,000 a year, but also the golf course pays for IT services from the county, finance, payroll services from the county. The golf course and the parks enterprise, as an example, pays 50% of my salary and benefits. So those types of costs, then we believe it's about $250,000 a year of kind of property tax relief for various areas. It pays for 15% of all the office staff that kind of goes into that operation. So that's doable. Year to date, the golf course revenues are about $300,000 above our budgeted revenues. Our expenses will also be higher because as we continue the season into November, we continue to pay staff into November, but certainly not to that tune. So this is very achievable. We went through the exercise of the percentage of years of bad weather. We make most of our margins in April and November. So when we have a good November, I mean, that's all money in the bank. Golf, noting it shows debt for major irrigation need and a short-term recommendation to really narrow that down. Part of this was really around cash flow and how much cash do we need to store, do we need to keep, do we want to keep in order to pay for those large expenses. So that's somewhere between $2.5 and $4.5 million that is going to be in somewhere between 5 and 12 years. So we're going to really work on narrowing that down as we continue to update this plan. Parks, unfunded, we unfunded roughly $100,000 a year in projects. So I mentioned 2.7 million was removed. $767,000 of this was asphalt. So there was about 2.74 million originally. There's a chart in, if you're interested. But so this is, again, when we say unfunded, we are not identifying funding for the project. Doesn't mean that we couldn't change our mind or add funding or have funding available. But at this point, if the parking lot at Yar was crumbling and it wasn't identified to be replaced, we have money to essentially convert, repulverize, and convert to gravel. So there was a look at which plowing needs and access needs and customer needs, which lots we would recommend paving. There's $90,000 a year of new revenue shown to balance the plan in parks, which we are hoping by add to fund balance, which you might see, you will see in the next budget, an add to fund balance, essentially moving over to the capital area. So that addition of rate revenue being designated in fees, which you will see some policies follow this plan to stand those up, to get those in motion. And then you see the endowment concept starting to come into play in 2026. And that's a major initiative that we're going to be talking about in the next 2, 3, 4 months of standing that up and taking a look at how projects get designated and selected for that. And then just to point out, there's also debt shown as it relates to cash flow in this plan for bathroom replacements. So there are, I think, 5 heated bathrooms throughout the parks, and this is a 50-year plan. So those are way in the out years still, but we were just kind of starting to go with, yeah, at some point we will be recommending that we fully replace those facilities. And then in the terms of the short-term recommendations worthy of note, the first one, the committee is going to see this later this month, the maintenance fee and policy to support the needed capital maintenance of the venues, cabins, and houses, annual rate increases that cover rising costs to do business. We've already been doing this. We do this every year, but it's gonna get real next year. Some of the numbers we're seeing on our new golf cart lease, and there's only one way to make up a $50,000 increase or a $75,000 increase in costs if you're trying to sustain the level that you're playing at. So that's a point that I think is an intentional policy decision to cover those costs, that we are not subsidizing the work going into these places. Plan and narrow the costs for the irrigation system. Again, this is just kind of a task list. The cash balance discussion and policies. This is something we really identified. If you go to the end of the plan and you read those sheets, and you can see at the bottom how much cash we're carrying. It's not fund balance, cash. And there is a policy discussion that we have identified that we need to have related to our cash balance policies about how we collectively feel, how much money we collectively feel we want to hold and carry or not carry or save for or have in the bank. So that is a discussion we're going to have. There's some recommendations around endowment committee actions and the sales tax. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Anyone? Okay, how do you turn him on?
He's you can just.
Carol Mary has the first question.
Yes, I apologize for all of you in the chamber tonight who aren't really into the statistics and the detail of developing a long-term plan for the successful management of the parks and the golf course. This document, if you've got some night when insomnia just is overtaking you, it'd be a good thing to just to take to bed with you and read through it line by line. Trust me, it'll put you to sleep. But for those of us who are working in the county and are particularly involved with the Land Use and Planning Committee, highest recommendation and commendation to Jamie, Ms. Ludovic, and her entire staff. This is a tremendous document they put together. It's a tremendous amount of time has been put into this. They've literally tried everything, including the kitchen sink. Or kitchen sinks, as it may be. And keep in mind, it's a living document. It will change over years. But what they have done in the department to take the parks off of the levy and actually have the golf course at this point in time is contributing back and paying for the parks, I think it's phenomenal. And I would encourage all of you to support the adoption of this plan. Again, it's insomnia. It's for the insomniacs if you really aren't into the document, into the parks and such. But it's extremely detailed, and commendations to everybody involved, Jamie. Thank you very much. That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Kelly.
Jamie, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not clear how this works. You can kind of help me out a little bit. I honestly, seeking knowledge. So we have this, enterprise fund, and I assume that endowment from the golf course, is that part of that fund or no? Or is that separate? How's that work?
It is completely separate.
Okay.
So the endowment dollars, we have an endowment fund, we have the makings of an advisory committee who will govern the distributions of that fund back to Washington County. So they will make recommendations. They will hear recommendations from us to them, and then they will make recommendations on how those funds get allocated and spent. So half of those funds were contributed by the county. And so there is a bit more, that's why the $75,000 number that's shown to help us basically say with the $75,000, which is the county contribution, half of the endowment, we believe we have a plan that we can sustain for the next 50 years. But those dollars have not yet been allocated, nor have projects been selected to match with those funds or approved. So outlining the procedures and the process for how that is going to work and how those distribution recommendations are going to be made is a short-term initiative. It is my understanding that the private sector funds have a desire to make some distribution recommendations prior to 2026, which is when you're seeing kind of the county half start to show up, or the concept that we wouldn't do anything with some of the money until that point. So that's a long way of saying there's a lot to work through, and why the recommendation reads the way it is of institutionalizing a way for the county board to work collaboratively with that group to utilize those, not only for maintenance projects that we might recommend, but also added amenities. Because there'll be more money in the endowment. There is more money in the endowment than what's shown in this plan. We estimate eventually those annual distributions could be, 125, 140,000 a year. And they could hold them, right? We're not going to fund a project this year. We're going to do one next year. They could do things like, the example I like to use is if my plan says the Glacier Hills playground is up for replacement, I'd really like to see the endowment fund support this. We think it's $50,000. They might come in and say, oh, we'd really like to see this playground added ADA accessible features, some educational components. Let's allocate more money to that playground than just potentially what that might be. But that advisory committee is completely separate from, and those recommendations will come through the process to this group.
And so you have a separate account then that is strictly the parks. And that, I guess I'm going to get answer. So we put aside a lot of money from the sale of properties.
Yes, and that money is what is showing up in that. If you go to the back of the plan, the cash balance,
Okay.
where you start to see, oh, there's $1 million in here. Where'd that come from? That's the enterprise fund balance, and that cash is made up of the cash the county board injected into the enterprise by sale of property through the financial sustainability plan. So when we sold the Aaron property, putting me on the spot here, but when we sold that for $375,000, that cash went into this fund.
Right.
For use by parks. So that's what that balance is.
And are we working off that cash, or are we working off interest on that cash? Or are we not even doing anything with it because we're sustainable on all the charges that we have for, say, fees and?
So if you read the schedules in the back of the plan, you can see the impact of the plan on that cash. So it fluctuates, but yes, there are some years where we spend into it. We build it back throughout the 50-year plan.
Okay, that makes sense. I just wanted to be clear on that whole thing, but thank you very much.
Before we go on too far in the discussion, I need a motion in a second. Supervisor Kelling, Supervisor Smeechek. All right, up next is Supervisor Newland.
Thank you. Earlier you mentioned the enterprise fund pays a portion of your salary and benefits and IT and finance maybe. Do all of the remaining parks dedicated employees' salaries and benefits come from this enterprise fund?
So most of the employees are 100% in this enterprise fund. So the golf course employees are in this fund. Certain employees like pretty much me and some of our office staff are partial golf. So a part of me is paid for by golf. I think it's about maybe a little less than 20%, 17% of my overhead is attributed to them.
So you have other staff that maintains other parks besides the golf course, you know, mowing and things like that.
Yes,
Are they in this enterprise?
they are in this enterprise. Yes, so it's different from what you see in local governments where you see rec departments that are 100% covered, and then you have the public works department that actually takes care of everything. We're one.
Okay, so the only items that would necessarily, and I say in the levy would be the equipment purchases or capital stuff purchases like that, maintenance equipment.
Equipment would be funded with the CIP sales tax. The other element there is we are an enterprise and we do charge back time spent on county grounds for snow plowing and landscaping. So when we plow the sheriff's department,
Okay.
they get a bill for those hours.
Okay. Thank you.
Supervisor Krebs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jamie, looking at the exhibit towards the end of the spreadsheets, and I'm on the page where 2026 is shown, so it shows the endowment funding coming into effect. A couple questions, kind of looking at especially the highlighted yellow portions for the new revenues. So, because those are listed as new revenues, are those revenues that are growing, that we're assuming they're growing by, like, I'll take maintenance fee revenue, 44,000 in year 23. Is that 44,000 of new revenue, or? Because it's the same every year.
Yes and yes. So, and yes. Last one first. We probably should have adjusted that incrementally over time to grow, you know, as we raise rates and we raise, we didn't because we were trying to keep it simple. But yes, in theory, that should grow. The maintenance fee is a new revenue stream that you will pick up later. It's a new fee added on to rental rate reservations. So it would be new revenue kind of earmarked for capital. The other two, the second yes, those are growth that we plan to take the growth in the revenues and earmark them for capital.
It's just how I look at this page. It looks like every year we're gonna grow. We're gonna 100% have 100% growth in our new revenues. And I don't think that's what's anticipated.
No,
Yeah,
it's just
plan.
more of that's how much it's actually staying the same each year.
Okay, so we're assuming a 0% growth in these
Yes.
revenues.
And that's
So,
probably
yeah,
it.
after the first year, they're no longer new revenues, they're just a revenue.
And we're actually assuming that the maintenance fee stays at 44,350, 44,350, 44,350. That should we be raising that 3% or 2%? Probably, but we were trying to simplify the concept.
Okay. This next question for the endowment funding, whether it's the county's half or the private half, if I think we're calling it that. That's to be determined what we're spending that on. So that would be going towards whether it should be more CIP type projects, I understand, or new projects, not so much the ongoing operations costs.
Correct. And this plan is 75% CIP.
So would that money be going towards the, let's call it the unfunded wish list or the unfunded projects that didn't make the cut so far? Because earlier in the plan, there are things that didn't make the list.
Yeah.
You know, that will be, I don't want to say neglected, but they're just not going to be a priority in the future.
Yes,
That-
so
That's where we could address some of those items if they.
so the endowment revenues, the private side as well as growth in the public side or the public side is a revenue stream to potentially look at the unfunded items. However, this plan is saying conceptually at a very high level to just keep the lights on with the existing capital needs of the project list that we have put together. Roughly, it'd be nice if about $75,000 went towards these projects we've already identified in that funded category.
Okay.
Did you follow that? So I need some of that money to make this 2050 plan work, or I need to go back to the list and cut even deeper.
I just point that out or bring this up so we recognize that, you know, let's say 2026 or whenever these endowment funds are accessed. Some of them are pre-planned a little bit.
A little bit. The way I envision it kind of working is a menu of here are the projects that are in the plan to fund. And which of these, you know, we have to be very cautious. We want that endowment to be very strategic and very successful and very thoughtful about which projects are how we're doing that. So I think that that's a really good observation and we could talk for a long time about that.
Last question / statement. This is labeled a Parks Thriving Plan. But at the same time, reviewing it, it looks like this is, I don't want to call it bare bones, but this is what's keeping the lights on and just I feel like treading water in the parks. Is that, I guess in the year 2050, when I walk into a county park, will it have the same feel that it has today? Will there be some projects that, you know, I look at should have been done that didn't get done? But obviously I'll see some project, you know, some new pavement, some new stuff. Will it still have, I guess, is this, we labeled it thriving, but is this going to be improving the parks by 2050? Or is it going to be, are we going to be at the same level of service should the public expect?
We are not. We will maintain and improve the existing park experience with this plan. It is thriving because it is almost unheard of for parks departments to have their capital funded. Now, we did cut some things, so that's accurate, and made some intentional decisions about moving a few things to an unfunded list. But absent that, you know, I like to use the example that we're going to be making a significant asphalt investment. This county board has not invested in asphalt in my tenure. So, you know, 8 years I've been asking for preventative seal coating and we haven't had the money to do those types of things. So by putting something like this together, identifying the funding, showing how it's going to happen, I feel like we finally have the playbook that will sustain staff turnover in order to say, oh, it's time to beat Sand Beach. You know we have $6,550 adjusted for inflation every third year to put the sand on your beach. That type of management we did not have in place before this plan. So there's both the organization of buying the tables and putting the chairs in place and making sure that those investments are made, as well as the ability to have a discussion about what's a good investment and what's not a good investment.
Okay. When I just in the past, I've heard from constituents, you know, they'll come in and that there's always something to cherry pick, and you know, they'll come in and say, we're not cutting the grass how we used to, or there's peeling paint in areas where we're not tackling maintenance how we should. But then they see us, if this plan is successfully approved tonight, they'll say, but yeah, you pat yourself on the back with a thriving plan, but there's still, I just want to set the level of expectations out there to our constituents, it's not going to be Taj Mahal of parks with the thriving plan in place. This is still our level of service expectations should be passed.
I mean, and that's accurate, but following this meeting, this board will take up, after the committee takes it up, a budget amendment authorizing additional maintenance spending based on the plan and the new revenue streams created. So there will be, and if you follow, I'd love to sit down and go through the detail, because I think that we should be able to do better than we've been doing.
I'm a big proponent on reinvesting where this plan takes us, the asphalt and those hard costs. That's what I look at when I walk in the parks right away or look in the parks, but I want to make sure the public constituents can see and understand that too. So, but thank you for your work on this project so far, and hopefully what it becomes. So thank you.
I will echo Supervisor Mary's comments earlier. It's amazing what you put together here. So good work. We'll vote electronically on this.
One. Missing. Two. We're missing two.
Someone didn't vote. Double check.
Yeah, we're missing one. Run it, 18, so 19, 20, we're missing one.
Everybody hit their yes or no button again to make sure. No.
Cast it as this.
I did.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Yep, we're just calling it.
All right. We'll move on to resolution 38, authorized temporary truck construction easement for the Family Promise of Washington County expansion project at Carl's Place. I believe Mr. Schmidt, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your committee report, you'll see a report, a resolution and a drawing for potential construction easement, the Family Promise site. You may remember the grant is going through the Washington County, which means we have to follow certain rules and requirements to obtain land, even an easement on our own property, to follow state rules and regulations. So we have to follow the same rules and regulations we do for obtaining right away or any other easement, because we have condemning authority. So as part of that process, we need a board, which is the county board in this instance, to approve us to obtain that easement. I can rest assured you, this is not a condemnation process with this individual. We will be having to contact them, give them the right of property rights ownership, and then negotiate with them for this potential easement to construct a temporary driveway. If you're familiar with this site, it's off of Water Street to the south. It's already a gravel parking lot, has been for 30 plus years already, since, well, maybe not quite 30 years, since the mid-90s. And so we're looking at potentially using that instead of the construction traffic going through the current parking lot. You can imagine having concrete trucks, haul trucks putting in your trusses, all your other deliveries going through a parking lot past the front door is not really convenient. So What we're looking for is the ability to make contact with West Bend Transit to see if they're willing to provide an easement there during construction. When construction ends, the easement will then terminate as well. There will be no cost to the county. This will be paid for either by the construction company or by Family Promise if they so desire compensation for that easement as well. So I'm sure we open up to any questions that the board or the chair may have.
Any questions or comments? Supervisor Krebs.
By the county assisting in obtaining this construction easement, the language of the construction easement, I would assume would be covering the liability and or restoration aspects of
Yes.
of the construction.
Because we / Family Promise, yes, would be if any damage happens to it, yes.
Because it's a gravel plot, there's not so much damage, it's more the restoration or liability aspect.
Right.
So, okay, thank you.
Anyone else? There being none, we'll vote electronically on. Oh, we need a motion and second. Supervisor Krebs, Supervisor Bisbal. Now we can vote. We'll note that Supervisor Chadron abstains because he's associated with the construction company doing the work. It passes. Thank you. Then we'll move on to ordinance 5, which I believe will be presented by Attorney Stern. Need a motion in a second. Supervisor Schwab, Supervisor Schulteis.
So good evening, everybody. What we have here is an amendment to our ethics code that was suggested by both the county's ethics board and also by our outside counsel, Attorney Andy Phillips, who you may remember, recognize that name. He's counsel for the Counties Association. And the recommendation that I received from both those sources was that we should include in our ethics code a definition of misconduct and also include a provision that requires a self-report in the event any public official, which also includes county employees, not just elected officials, would have to self-report any sort of conduct that may implicate this code. The genesis of this particular request is based on a couple of incidents we had earlier this year involving county supervisors who were involved in some situations that unfortunately resulted in this code being implicated. And when we had outside counsel involved in the Mahalik matter, for instance, he made this recommendation after reviewing what we had here. So I did take the matter before the ethics board back on September 20th. They came up with this definition. They endorsed it. And so that's what I'm bringing before you tonight. So this would result in a change in the ethics code to actually define misconduct is.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Supervisor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney Stern, looking at this document, I understand what we're trying to do. We want to keep the morals and ethics of this body certainly in the highest regard. But I guess I want to ask you for clarification about what about due process? I mean, if somebody is accused of something that may or may not happen, but it could be something that may shed a bad light on this board. But then all of a sudden, turns out I didn't do it, or something like that. How is that affected in this code?
Nothing involving the self-report necessarily leads to any sort of discipline or leads to any sort of ethical penalties or anything like that. It's just, it's a report so that the board or the department head or the county executive, whoever this individual answers to, is able to monitor the situation to determine at some point, is this code implicated or not? And that's the intent of it. It's not that if you report something that it automatically means that, oh, boy, you're getting hauled in front of the ethics committee or there's a problem here. But for example, one of the incidents we had was a situation where a supervisor moved out of district. We weren't notified of that. Nobody knew of it, and the supervisor needed to sit on this body and cast votes and so forth. We're looking to require information to be shared with, for example, the county board here in that situation, so that information can be reviewed and then a decision can be made what, if anything, needs to happen. So this is not intended to cause anybody to self-incriminate or anything like that. It doesn't automatically lead to a penalty under the ethics code, but it's so that the issue is on the radar in the event either turns into something or may be something.
No, you turned off for some reason.
There we go. I guess so. In a scenario where a supervisor may have, and I'm using supervisors, employees, I think is probably a little bit different, than the standards we're held to or whatever. But so as a supervisor could be accused of something and then self-report, hey, Brad, I want you to know this warrant or whatever was served on me, whatever the case may be. Then how would that affect, or what would go into place as a result of this policy?
The definition doesn't cause anything to happen or not happen in terms of misconduct. It's the clarifying. The code in and of itself requires already, quite frankly, that if you're involved in a situation, it's code that you ask for an opinion or you report the information so that if necessary ethics opinion can be created or something like that. So the self-report aspect of this thing has technically kind of been here between the lines anyway. And what council said was, I'd like to see it a little more clear than what the county has. And the ethics board felt that way too. So they came up with this language, the definition, and of course the self-report explicit requirements with right there in black and white for everybody to see. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. I see, we got the definitions, 40-30 definitions and stars to your star. What I'm accustomed to in my line of work is we have to review these things annually, do annual education, and it's a requirement. It's got to be done by a certain day or you can't work. It's one of those required educational things. Adding the definitions, yeah, that helps you to look those up and everything, but to see, examples, I don't think some people, realize, oh, shoot, that was unethical or not. I would request, some type of education examples for the board, like the couple you just shared. And, too, you gave me advice too in the past for one of my appointments where there was concern of meetings violating open records, and essentially, not to attend that meeting. Then what was your advice? And say, if I would have attended, that could have potentially put me at risk then too. But so I would appreciate some education for the board on more, concrete examples, and instead of just these pretty legal definitions. And then after that education, to have this go into effect.
I'm always happy to meet with the board as supervisors individually or as groups. I'd be more than happy to walk you through the code. I don't know that we want to do that necessarily in great length tonight. I'm certainly not prepared for that, but absolutely, I'm more than happy. And situation referenced, by the way, in that particular case, I had no concern about your integrity or about any sort of ethical breaches, even if you would have attended and not known. The issue for the ethics code is essentially you've You look at the code, you find something that may look like it could be a conflict before it happens, you notify me if you need to, or the ethics board if you need to, and we can give you an opinion, and that protects you. The idea here is that if you're involved in something that occurred, and you may be completely innocent, I'll use that term in terms of legal troubles or something like that, doesn't mean you're going to get any sort of, like I was telling Supervisor Killing, any sort of penalty under the code, but at least it's self-disclosure, so the situation can be monitored. It could end up being a whole lot of nothing. It could be something, and if it's something, then we have to figure out how to handle that in the four corners of the document.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Brad, the question I have is with regard to the point where it goes to misconduct by any other public official, or the misconduct being labeled as that which for which imprisonment is a possible consequence. There are things that I don't really know if something that someone had done is something that has prison as a possible consequence. To that example, like what happened to Mr. Mahalik. I mean, I couldn't tell you whether dropping the gun was even a breach of law or anything, as opposed to something that just happened. So I get concerned that, you could, someone could be then accused of not reporting something, but they actually just didn't know that it was something that had this, that breached this law. And I don't know, how do we rectify that, or how do we?
Yeah, that's definitely a good question, and I think the idea here is that you're not expected to know necessarily the ins and outs of every statute, and if there's ramifications, if someone's arrested, what that might lead to or not lead to. But I think what it refers to, for example, is if you know that Supervisor X has been arrested, for example, or whatever, and that supervisor hasn't disclosed that, you're aware of that, you may want to say, hey, look, so-and-so got in some trouble, just so you're aware. I don't know what it is or not, just so you're aware. And then we can look into that. And yeah. That's right. You may be, but that's
Saying I'm obligated to do that.
I would tell you that if you're aware that another supervisor or employee is engaged in misconduct, that you should report that. If you're not aware or you don't fully understand maybe what the penalties might be, that's fine. But if I saw Supervisor so-and-so steal something out of this building, and I knew that's what it was, I think you got to report that.
Thank you.
And by the way, I should say, I don't think that even has anything to do with this definition. I think that's just, when you look at the ethics code as a whole, and you read that through, and supervisors, and I use supervisors for any employee, any public employee that we have to engage in some sort of theft or misconduct or criminal behavior, we have the obligation to come forward and report that, regardless of what this definition says. This definition is, I think, spelled it out, what misconduct is. Gives you a hard definition, but I think that obligation exists either way.
Supervisor Krebs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I echo similar concerns of just, maybe what my ignorance may be of certain statutes and stuff for the severity of it. My one other comment would be more the reporting of others. This feels like this is slightly, it could be, it feels like it would be handle filling. And I understand if there's something severe, the appropriate people need to know about it, but at the same time, if it's something that's severe, I would trust that the higher beings would be made aware of it through other legal channels to start with. I understand the definition has to create a definition somewhere, but it just kind of feels a little bit like grade school.
Well, this is already in the code, this requirement. This is already currently in your code that you're required to report. But the difference is here, this is a self-reporting requirement, which isn't in there. So I thought it was interesting that our code requires you to report on someone else, but not on yourself. And so
With our rights to not self-employment.
as far as,
By self-reporting, are you self-incriminating?
well, no one's saying that you can say I'm guilty. Of course, I was arrested for such and such, or I was charged with such and such, or I did this or this occurred and it's under investigation. No one's asking you to confess. But I think if you're arrested, the sheriff needs to know that. County Attorney's Office needs to know that. And because there may or may not be ethical implications at the end of the day. It may well be nothing happens. It may well be something has to happen. We saw that with the mayor's situation.
With one other comment too, that it doesn't say it in here, but I'll say it. As always, you are always available as a county attorney for consultation on these things too. To even know if it should get an opinion on if it should rise to a self-report or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean,
You've got a fabulous person that bounce ideas and things off of, so I appreciate that.
well, I appreciate that statement because I'm always here for all of you and for any, quite frankly, any public employee that needs to come to me in confidence and talk about something. And this, I would assume, this year we had a couple of incidents that happened that in all my years with the county, it's been 19 years pretty soon. Never saw anything like it before. My hope is that this is a rare thing, it's a drastic thing, we'll never see it again. Or if we do, maybe be once every so many years. But we did have a couple of incidents that happened that invoked the code, unfortunately. And when we brought in outside counsel and the ethics board got involved in it, that our code, they felt we needed to tighten up in a couple of places so that it was very clear the expectations were. So that's where this came from.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Dan. I'm sorry, I had a thought. I should have. I'm sorry, I didn't think about this before the meeting and discuss it with you. But this, the concerns by the other supervisors, make my brain go towards whistleblowers, whistleblower protection. I have that also at the place I serve, and this language and stuff in the self-reporting, I've been accustomed to that too my whole nursing career. But do we have whistleblower protection? Also, I'm sorry, I didn't investigate that beforehand. I just thought of that.
No, that's fine. Absolutely, we would. Well, if,
Not right now in this meeting, but in a future meeting, to share the whistleblower protection aspects.
essentially, if you they call it whistleblowing, you blow the whistle on some issue that usually tends to flow more from management or some county practice or something like that that may be perceived as being illegal, maybe some discriminatory practice or something like that. That your job is protected. And you can't retaliate it against by supervisors or management members, so forth. That's essentially what the document is here.
And we have an ordinance on that or any document for whistleblower protection?
Yes, it's the law.
Okay, I'm just accustomed to an additional, whatever policy or something I would do, in the healthcare world.
I understand.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
I want to just add a comment. As county board supervisors, we have to have integrity. So away from, saying tattling or anything, we have to be above reproach. So this is all necessary and it's very serious. Supervisor Krebs.
Who does the county executive report himself to? Or the county board chairman? People report to them, but who do they report to?
I would say I don't think it's written here, arguably, it's in my office.
I'm not prepared to make a motion to amend this, but I think that's something that should be put in writing in this. Whether they report to the opposite, seat position or to the county attorney's office or directly to the ethics board. But I think it should be shown that everyone is accountable to someone.
I don't disagree with that.
I don't see anything in here that exempts me from these rules. So
Line 46 says that people report to you, but basically as a supervisor, you would report to yourself as read. And right now, the county executive reports to no one. I think if we want to vote on this tonight, otherwise I'll offer an amendment, and if it's the wrong amendment, we can always amend it at a future date, but I'll make a motion somewhere after line 46, at the county, both the county executive position and the county board chair shall make self-reports to the county attorney's office at this time.
I'll second that. Any discussion? Supervisor Gallus?
This discussion and motion, wouldn't that pertain to all elected officials as they only report to constituents?
But as Supervisor Krebs said, it kind of infers that if you have to report to me, then who do I report to? So it doesn't hurt to put the language in there. So
Not to the motion, to the original.
okay, so then we'll take a voice vote on the amendment. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a little follow-up. I just want to make it known. So we're talking about reporting and self-reporting and stuff like that. In my second term, political motivated reasons, somebody tried to accuse me of something, doing something that I shouldn't have done. And it brought in outside investigation from Waukesha Sheriff's Department. And eventually I was cleared of everything. My concern is that somebody might use this like they did to me as a political tool. And that's why I've been kind of questioning this, because it's like I have concerns that somebody would be so unscrupulous as that person who did that to me. That there should be some type of protection against a person trying to report something for political reasons. And I'm wondering how that might be affected through this. But it's already in the code. I mean, what someone's motivations are, I suppose you may legal recourse if there's some libelous remarks or defamation type of case you could bring in. I don't think there's any place for that really in the ethics code. That in and of itself is probably unethical behavior if it's brought by someone who's a member of this body or another public official. And again, that public official definition encompasses all county employees. I know what you're talking about in that incident in particular. But again, just to be clear, although there's some cross outs and some additions here, the obligation to report somebody else has always been in here. It's the obligation to self-report that was being added tonight. And in terms of the county board chair, the county executive reporting in my office, it's not because I discipline them or they report to me. I don't want to create that impression at all. But as the county's legal advisor, then I can make referrals to the ethics board, or I can initiate any sort of investigations that might need to take place. Just as if the department employee reports to their department head, I'm not insinuating I'm the head of I supervise these gentlemen, but it makes sense to me that I then initiate some sort of investigation or bring it even to the the vice chair or whomever if need would be. So I just want to make it clear, especially to the chairman and the county executive that with us tonight, that would certainly not be my expectation of us, and the answer to me in any sort of capacity.
Okay, I appreciate the concern Supervisor Krebs raised and the amendments. So thank you. I think that's a good addition. I appreciate the concern Supervisor Kelly made. I think that's a legitimate one. And I think if we have issues in the future, and I think we've always done a good job of this in the past, that those issues are dealt with through the proper channels in ways that are not public unless and until it becomes appropriate to involve the public. We had one back in 2018. It involved a closed session here. It was dealt with privately, except to the extent that that individual made it public. We had two earlier this year. One became very public because of the circumstances. The other one was dealt with largely privately, and some people may not even know it happened. And that's kind of the way things should be. Yeah. So, yep.
All right, seeing no other lights on, we'll vote on this electronically. Passes unanimously. Our next meeting date is Wednesday, December 14th at 6 p.m. This meeting's adjourned.